Alright, so what are we doing here?
We are changing the carrier on your Ford 9-inch differential, Tru Hi9 differential. We're just doing a carrier swap.
Alright, so this is the new Grizzly locker and you're locating the ring gear on it. So this is the Hi9 housing with one load bolt. Alright, gonna press the ring gear on here. Are they grabbing it all? Not yet?
Some of them kind of can. You know, we do this to, well, I do this to to make sure when I'm pressing it on that it gets happy in the center of the hole, because you can get it slightly off and then it makes it kind of difficult for some of the holes to line up. And we use the wood to protect the teeth of the ring gear. It doesn't take a lot of force to get it to go on. Through racing, I found 263 is actually a certain type of red Loctite that is super high oil resistant. It is off the charts compared to red Loctite, normal red Loctite that you buy at the store. So you have to look for 263 or special order it. And this stuff is amazing for hardware fasteners that is in oil-soaked conditions, like a differential, ring gear, or anything else. So it's the best stuff I've found. To go too fast and tightening so it doesn't shoot the Loctite everywhere. So I usually just slowly snug them down. These fasteners, I know, because they can take as much as this gun can put out, so we just go till it stops.
Putting this bearing on. Alright, so this bearing's the same?
Yeah, they're the same on each side. You know, you can buy them as a set where it's the cone and bearing, or you can buy them individually like how you purchased them, where it's just the individual pieces. Any appropriate race and any bearing will go with any other, so they're really kind of interchangeable. And we put the bearings on after we do the ring gear, because while we're doing that, we don't want to have to be worrying about contamination or damage to our nice new bearing. Looks like I got good alignment, so I can just go all the way down in one spot. Yeah, and the cage actually sticks up above the bearing, so if you don't do what I did and you just press it down with a flat block, a lot of times you can dent this roller bearing cage if you're not using a spacer or anything else. Because you can see with this sitting there, it actually rides on the snout, and as well as it hits the cage if you try to go off. So that's why we use a spacer, to make sure we don't damage the bearing.
This is the race.
Yeah, so I'm putting, these are the adjuster rings. That's what makes a Ford 9-inch such beautiful for your home, you know, wheeler, wrencher, is because this makes it very easy to set the adjustment of preload and manipulate the ring and pinion for a good contact pattern, is because it's like infinitely adjustable, versus in a differential like a Dana 60 or any type of Dana housing, you have to use like case spreaders and put shims in, and sometimes you have to put shims behind the bearing, which means you're constantly pressing the bearing off, pressing the bearing on, and it's rather annoying. So my favorite's Ford 9-inch, because these collars simply just sit in there and you just tighten them to whatever you need them to. You know, no shims or nothing you needed.
Alright, so
I'm going to be careful about lining these up to make sure it's seated. You're not trying to, when you tighten these down, that you're actually cross-threading anything.
what was that?
This is a Dana 60 spindle nut tool that has a bunch of cogs on it, and it happens to be the perfect size to match up to these adjuster rings for a Ford 9-inch. And you know when you got the adjuster and everything lined up is when this cap sits down and there's no rocking or anything else, and you have a little bit of tension on moving this. So I know I got that thing nice and square. If you don't have it square, it'll rock. Over here, see how it rocks right there? I probably don't have it lined up perfectly, so I'll recheck that one.
Oh, this hole can't go up here. You can't transverse that. So how do you know which way to put it in?
There,
okay,
dot, and then a dot to match it up, so that way you don't get them confused.
All right. so you know that you got the right one at the top.
Yeah. So you can't mix these up too easily because they have threads and they have the spacer for the bearing to ride on the surface here. And just like how they do a dot over here, they don't do a dot on this one. So you know, no dot over here, or dot over here to match it up. And then, you know, you match the threads up on this as you're putting it down. So see, now I got it nice and lined up, no more rocking. So even though it looked like I had everything lined up correctly, somehow it was just slightly off the thread and it wasn't sitting down flush. So now it's flush and this spins nice and freely. So right now, because I just set the bearing races in there, there's no preload on this, and this thing just spins like no tomorrow. So you can see how now it doesn't spin as freely. But now I need to get the pinion in there to make sure the lash and the load bolt and get everything back into the correct backlash. What Tru Hi9 does is they take the low pinion support member here and actually weld on a little oil catch, so as it's spinning, it's pushing oil into this so that way it can be fed properly in a high position. That's kind of why they call it Tru Hi9. And they do make some other aftermarket pinion supports that come factory machined for a high pinion setup. They don't need this little tool, this little baffle here, but that's how they modify it for a stock component for this kind of application. Always a little tricky to get back in. There we go. A lot of times I used to use the tooth to pull itself in. They didn't use washers, so now all this metal is actually crushed. So these need washers on them to not crush the metal down.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah, you see how it's indented.
Oh, you don't need many foot-pounds on that?
No, this is all for mock-up right now. Once it's in the vehicle, we'll tighten that down snugly, because we still have this skid plate to put back over it. So pinion's in place, we can check the backlash. Yeah, so that's the third bearing, because you have two bearings holding the shafts, and then you got the third bearing at the end of the snout. Get it in a position to where I can hold it nice and firm, and then get it. So right now we're looking at about 15 thousandths of play, and anywhere from, you know, you can set them tight to like 8 to 12. Racing and stuff, we can go high as 20. Usually I kind of like to sit around 12 because probably some things will wear and move a little bit. So if I go around 12, it'll probably end up at 15.
Is that going to tighten it more?
I'm loosening that side just a hair, and I'm going to tighten this side just a hair. And it doesn't take much to change the preload, because we're talking thousands here.
All right, so if you were to like tighten this side all the way up and leave this side kind of loose, what would happen? So you basically use these back and forth as like two sides. You want it tightened together for your preload, but then you can move and unadjust one and adjust the other to slide the carrier side to side, and that moves your ring gear closer to your pinion or further away from it. And since we're just doing a carrier swap and not a fresh ring and pinion, the pinion depth has already been set, it's already been set up, everything's great, so all we really got to do is just make sure that carrier is back in the position of where the preload is. And then when you set your pinion up, you want to set your preload on the bearings there, but then also you have shims to drop the pinion into the ring gear or back out to make sure you got good contact patterns. Alright, so here's the housing, the nasty housing. It's got a loop locker on it.
Done enough of them.
Super heavy.
The nut to fit on the stud after you tighten everything else down, so you gotta get this one started first. or else you won't have room.
So are you going to turn it and we'll see if the pinion turns?
Yeah, look at it.